Hey, good morning. So you guys had the chance to take the blue pill or the red pill, and you chose the red, so thank you for sticking around to hear about OpenStack. Last year we talked about OpenStack, what the heck is it? And now we're going to talk about, is it ready? So thank you all for being here. So just by quick, if you know who this is, raise your hand. Anybody know who this is? So this is, if this will work. There he is. So this is Edward Deming, and he was deeply involved with quality. If he didn't die back in '93, he'd be 114 next week. And he worked a lot with the Japanese, helped all the manufacturing after World War II get better with quality. He said if you focus on quality, and then you will see your costs go down, you'll see market share and revenue. And this is a quote, he spent a lot of time in Japan. The Deming cycle, plan, do, check, act, came from him. And they named the Deming Prize for companies that focus on total quality management after him. And this is one of his quotes that's been attributed to him. And my guess is not many of you speak or read Japanese. So what this actually translates to is, in God we trust, all others must bring data. And that's what I'm going to do today, is show you some data that's specific around OpenStack. So hopefully you guys will come away with some insights. And what I plan to do is talk about cloud adoption trends. So I'm going to insert a lot of our InfoPro data. We increasingly are asking enterprises about OpenStack as they are sharing their insights with us. I'll talk about the OpenStack momentum within the community, and probably a lot of interest in our market sizing data. So I'm going to share market sizing and the different business models we're tracking. Last year when we talked about business models, we've actually evolved our thinking since then. And then I'll share some insights on customers and enterprises, where they're showing interest in OpenStack and where some of the concerns still lie, and then share some best practices for the service providers amongst us. And then right after, we're going to go right into a panel. We got some great panelists who are not shy, so please stick around. We got a great panel that's going to start right after. So before I drill into OpenStack, so just a couple of more macro points I wanted to share. Again, this is from our InfoPro services. And as you can see, when we ask enterprises, and these are enterprises that 80% of the ones we talk to have over $1 billion in revenue, and 2/3 of them have IT spending over $500,000. So that's the kind of folks we're talking about across all different vertical markets. And as you can see, as the journey to the cloud, a lot of them are still in that virtualization and automation phase, and as they're trying to get to private cloud, a lot of it has been shared earlier and will be shared later in the week. There's a lot of reasons why that is, and you'll hear from others. But just to set the stage, that private cloud, public cloud, still a small percentage of the business at that level. The other thing I wanted to share, and this is showing data for now and in 2 years across the different venues. So as you can see, there's non-cloud and private cloud and hybrid and public. So these are where enterprises are deploying workloads. So again, you'll see that 2 years from now, 50% of all workloads are still going to be in a non-cloud environment. But the growing area is private cloud, and as we get into OpenStack, you'll see that that's a big focus area for OpenStack is private cloud. And then as you can see, still public cloud, still nascent even a couple years from now, as much as you see all the greatness that Amazon and Azure and Google Compute are doing in comparison to hosting and other venues, it's still a small part of the business. The other insight I wanted to show you is when we ask enterprises about cloud platform adoption, you can see how this trend has evolved over the year. And the key area is those middle three, and that's the near-term plan or in pilot and past in near-term pilot. So that's the opportunity for service providers, and that's where a lot of focus is on enterprises that are looking for cloud platforms. For the opportunity for service providers and vendors are focused here. It's still like 36%. And then when we talk about cloud deployment, this is kind of the race. William earlier had a cool graphic of the greyhounds chasing the rabbit. As far as the my area of focus and what we're going to talk about, these are some of the top names. So VMware, clearly the leader in private cloud. Amazon, clearly the leader in public cloud, but you also have Google and Windows Azure playing in the game. And then on the private side, the alternatives to VMware, the big names that people are thinking of as far as open source alternatives for private cloud, OpenStack, CloudStack, Eucalyptus recently being acquired by HP. We asked enterprises about exciting vendors or technologies or initiatives that they're working on. When we asked this question in 2012, OpenStack didn't even register. And as you can see when we asked it, it's now up there with big names with products that where they spend a ton of money on advertising and putting it on Super Bowl commercials and things. And here is OpenStack, which is a community-driven exercise. It's not attributable to any one product, so to speak, compared to these others. So it definitely has the mind shares of the C levels. So nobody knew who Deming was, but raise your hand if you remember this guy from Saturday morning cartoons. Okay, cool. So that's Bill, and he on Schoolhouse Rocks talked about how a bill became a law. And so I'm not going to get into any detail about what OpenStack is, but the one thing I did want to share, because we get a lot of questions about it, is so it's made up of all these projects, and some projects never make it to the incubation phase, and then projects that are in the incubation phase will ultimately end up in the integrated release. So that's kind of just shows that many projects vie to become incubated. Only some make it. Most recently, there was a couple around file sharing, Manila, and then as they evolve and get traction, they become part of the integrated release. We talked to all of the, not all of them, but a number of the vendors in the space, and we asked them about the maturity of the different projects. And this is a timeline, top to bottom, of the different releases. There's 2 releases annually now. They name them alphabetically. And Nova and Swift were in the beginning, and then you could see all the projects were evolved. And we got feedback from the vendors of how mature they were. You could see Swift and Nova, the 2 mainstays, and Cinder for block storage, again, a big one. But you'll notice like Neutron, for example. Neutron is the networking project. It used to be called Quantum. It still has some challenges. It has overlap with functionality in Nova. There's a lot of philosophical questions about how that's evolving, but this is just a snapshot of how evolved some of the projects have been. And you can see the future ones there. Those are incubated projects that are now going to become part of the integrated release, in like bare metal as a service, for example, and some of the others that are listed. The most recent one being Manila that NetApp was driving, and then others got involved to do shared file systems. So that's the extent of my technical OpenStack discussion. But as we talk about the momentum around OpenStack, when we say, is it ready for prime time? So these stats actually were provided to me by the foundation, and you can see how rapidly the community is growing over time. I first got involved with OpenStack when I worked for a network service provider, went down to Rackspace's site probably around the time of Diablo or Essex, I'm not quite certain which, and it really wasn't ready for a service provider at the time, so it quickly has evolved. It's these stats, it was 16,000 plus community members as of the Atlanta Summit, and they're over 19,000, so you clearly see a lot of people are involved. Supporting organizations, it's probably one of the main reasons why people that we talk to say that they're drawn to OpenStack is just the sheer number and the kinds of logos that are supporting the foundation, from Rackspace and IBM and Dell and HP and Cisco. There's a ton of vendors in there that are involved, and that's how people are drawn. And then summit attendees, as you can see, as they have their semi-annual summits, they had 4,600 people at the Atlanta Summit most recently. But to just put this into context, there's vendors like AWS, and they do their reInvent. They had 8,000 people on site and 10,000 remote attendees. And VMworld just a couple months ago had over 22,000. So you can see it's still, in comparison, small, but rapidly evolving. So what I did with this slide, I took that same community growth and overlaid some information about some of the key use cases. And you could see the, so Austin release was the initial one, evolved over to Icehouse was the most recent. So this is over 4 years of time. And in the early stages, it was Rackspace, it was NASA, it was AT&T. It was really geared for service providers. And as more and more functionality was added, you started to see enterprises like Best Buy and Bloomberg and Fidelity starting to get involved. And then when Havana came around, there was a big focus on the international users of it, C-Trip and some of the other Chinese companies that were involved. And then as of Icehouse, U.S. government and what I say, the logos that your kids recognize starting to show up, and they're doing production workloads. So you could see how as more and more enterprises are getting involved in OpenStack and sharing their stories, it's also helping the community grow. So this is actually data from the foundation as well. They do a user survey, and I'm talking about the data on the right here. And this is a comparison just from 6 months, September 2013 to April 2014. Clearly, OpenStack is a test and QA environment. There's a tremendous amount of POCs happening in comparison to production. So people are still early as far as production workloads in OpenStack, and I'll share some insights as to why that is. But as far as the types of use cases, so when we talk to enterprises and are asking them, what do you use an OpenStack for? And this is more the enterprise focus, more so than the service providers. Service providers clearly are providing public and private cloud. So as I had mentioned, private infrastructure as a service for specific to an enterprise. They're using it for virtual lab environments. There is some enterprise business applications. A lot of them are cloud native apps that were built for that purpose. And then we're starting to see a lot more data processing, Hadoop and data analytics and things like that are becoming more and more of interest to enterprises. So one of the things that we recently did was created a new market monitor. It's one of the services from 451. We do a lot on the size of the OpenStack, of the hosting and cloud market. We now have a new one that focuses on OpenStack specifically. We have over 60 vendors that we're tracking in here. And on the next slide, I'll get into the different business models and the size of that. But just as importantly as who's in is who's not in. So the kinds of companies that are not in are the servers and the storage and the networking vendors. So when EMC or NetApp or SolidFire or the vendors that provide storage, if that equipment can be used in a VMware environment or an OpenStack environment, we don't include that. We also don't include the revenue that PayPal generates from running on OpenStack or eBay or even Cisco's WebEx. So revenue generated from enterprises that are using the environment is not included. So let's get over to this one and we'll kind of walk through this a bit. So I guess the first thing I want to draw your attention to is the types of business models. What we're tracking are service providers, products, distros, and management, DevOps tools, cloud management, and the platform as a service providers. Last year, we actually broke out distros as a separate category, and we kind of combined this now with products because there's really not a lot of differentiation between what is a product and what is a distro. And even from the OpenStack Foundation perspective, they now have a marketplace and they treat them all the same. So service providers, clearly you could see that's the biggest share of the market, but overall, OpenStack eclipses $1 billion in 2015, eclipses $3 billion by 2018, overall growing at a 40% clip, which is roughly the same as the hosting and cloud market that we're tracking overall. Service providers, there's I think 28, 30 that we're tracking. The lion's share of this revenue, about 70%, I think it's 68% exactly, is Rackspace's public and private cloud offerings. By 2018, their share reduces to about 45%, and that's not because their business is getting smaller, it's just everybody else is growing as well. So included in service providers is Rackspace and DreamHost and Blue Box and IBM and HP. It's a number of folks that are doing either a private cloud capability on top of OpenStack or offering a public cloud offer. As far as the products, distros, and management, I actually just want to make sure I get them all. So these are the guys that have taken a version of OpenStack, have maybe wrapped some secret sauce around it, and are offering it as a product in a licensing model, very similar to how the Linux vendors did back in the early 2000s. So here, the big Linux guys, Red Hat, SUSE, and Canonical. And then there is Mirantis and MetaCloud and some others. Even HP now, while we're tracking a big portion of their revenue in the service provider bucket, they now have a distro. Even VMware has its own OpenStack distro as well. Included in that is not only the management functions that they provide, but a big focus area of OpenStack now is training. A lot of these vendors are now offering training, and again, that's another filter in the marketplace within the foundation is training, and a number of providers are doing that. It's one of the biggest challenges for enterprises is finding talent. It's a big problem for service providers as well, keeping and retaining the talent because they're in such high demand. So the next bucket is DevOps tools, and DevOps tools is probably 1% of the overall market. The CAGRs show a big number there, but it's kind of the law of small numbers. So the DevOps tools, think Chef and Puppet, and increasingly now Docker and SaltStack, companies like that. Cloud management, if you recall, Dell bought Stratius. They now call it Dell Cloud Manager, so that it includes them. It's also RightScale, which was mentioned earlier today, Nimbula, which is now owned by Oracle, but it's those platforms that manage multiple clouds. And then last is the PaaS providers. So CenturyLink bought AppFog, and CloudBees, and Red Hat's OpenShift, and IBM Bluemix. Those are the folks that are providing a platform as a service that works within the OpenStack environment. So as the numbers indicate, service providers still the biggest area, and these are the folks that are providing public and private cloud services to enterprises. Along those same lines is just some insight into some of the funding that's happened specifically within the OpenStack environment, how much money and how many deals. Just year to date, there has been 3. CloudBees got $11 million earlier this year, Puppet Labs got $40 million, and MetaCloud got $15 on top of the other money that they got last year. So in total, they got $25 million in funding. So clearly, there's a lot of interest in the investment community as how they can find success within the OpenStack environment. And as you may or may not have seen, MetaCloud was actually just recently purchased by Cisco, which is on this slide. So we tracked 33 M&A events since 2013, totaling 300 million, I believe, was the total. So ever since the Nicira acquisition by VMware that became their NSX platform, these are various deals. SoftLayer was purchased by IBM, not 100% OpenStack, but uses a lot of the technology in there. Red Hat's been very busy of late. Their most recent acquisition being Enovance, which builds and operates and manages private clouds and lets you focus on your core business, and they'll maintain an environment that is a company that's got started in France. Bless you. So as far as the enterprise feedback that we got as far as why they're drawn to OpenStack, what the consistent reasons: flexibility. You can take and use the pieces you want. You don't have to use Neutron if you don't like it. The modularity, the fact that you can pick, if you're doing block storage, you can use Cinder. If you're using object storage, you use Swift. You could decide which pieces you want to use and cobble a solution together. Now this says it says open source alternative, but it's not so much that it's an alternative to other open source platforms. It's the fact that it is open source. People don't want to keep paying the VMware tax, whether it's a service provider or an enterprise. They're looking to reduce their costs. So one of the things they see is that big bill they pay to VMware. So cost is a big piece of what they're doing. Companies like the NSA have been drawn to OpenStack because they can go in and see the code and modify the code and who knows what they're doing with that, but the fact that they can go in and modify the code, you can't do that with VMware. As I had mentioned before, just the major vendors backing the community is a big draw. I mentioned a number of them before, but there's a NASCAR slide that has hundreds of vendors that are involved, and consistently from enterprises we continuously hear that just the momentum of OpenStack is in big part due to the vendors that are back in the community, and for the open source community to survive really is helpful if there's a big funding backing from the community at large. And lastly is the fact that it supports multiple hypervisors. If you want VMware, you're using ESX. It allows you to do ESX and KVM, and there's even some service providers that will allow you to do Hyper-V and others as well. Now, how does this evolve over time is the continuous development. So as the community adds more features and functionality, this will only accelerate some of the adoption. Just as important as why they're drawn, there are some concerns. As I had showed you on that slide earlier, there is a number of POCs and QA environments, and the number of production environments is, in comparison, very low. A lot of people still think of it as a science project rather than science, but it's come a long way. VMware had at least a 10-year head start on OpenStack, but when people compare OpenStack to VMware, it's light on reliability and resiliency. It doesn't have vMotion, it doesn't have HA. There are vendors that have that capability that they built on their own, and one of the concerns with OpenStack is that some of those vendors are not contributing that technology back for the greater good, but that capability does exist in some cases. A lot of people still see it as kind of a toolkit. If you downloaded the code as an enterprise or a service provider yourself, there's over 1,200 parameters as of the Icehouse release that you got to configure to build an environment, and figuring out which components and which projects you want to get involved. That's why these distro and product companies like that I had mentioned before, whether it was the Piston Cloud and Cloud Scaling and HP's distro and the Linux providers, there's a number of vendors out there, and they're seeing the traction that they see because of the trusted product that's supported by a vendor rather than trying to go and cobble something together. The way people absorb OpenStack today, they either go and they'll do it themselves, they'll go and grab a distro and use the distro with a supported distro, or they're leaning on the service provider to provide everything for them. Those are kind of the three ways that OpenStack is consumed. Concern with fragmentation is also an issue. If you remember back in the days of Unix, Unix, there was a lot of different vendors involved with Unix. AT&T had a big part of it, and then Linux kind of took over and ran. So as much as the foundation and the governance across OpenStack is probably going to minimize that, it's not impossible to think that one of these versions of OpenStack becomes the Linux, and really we're kind of in the Unix stage. But again, that's unlikely, but still a possibility. As I had mentioned, it's complex to deploy. There's tons of parameters. A lot of people have issues standing it up. The fact that there's releases every 6 months is also a challenge for some enterprises that are used to buying software, deploying it, and it works for 2-3 years. Now you have a cycle of every 6 months of development, and going back and making sure it works is a challenge, and that again is a reason why folks are turning to service providers to kind of manage that whole experience for them. And then lastly, and I touched on this a bit before, there's such limited supply of developers, especially in the Silicon Valley, Bay Area. As soon as a vendor brings up to speed a number of developers, somebody else is going to come in and swoop in and take those. So again, that training is a big focus for folks like Mirantis and Red Hat and Rackspace, who have actual formal training programs that they offer to enterprise. So if you're looking for a job, become a OpenStack developer engineer. I think you can write your own ticket in those neighborhoods. So for the folks in the audience, just to kind of leave you with some best practices, if you will, and things that we've heard along the way here. So when people are building business cases to launch a private cloud offer internally as an enterprise or to do something as a service provider, don't underestimate the management overhead that's required to run an environment like this. In some cases, folks try to take their VMware experts and also manage an OpenStack environment, and there's a lot of challenges. So that's the first thing. There's a whole ecosystem of vendors, so if somebody doesn't want to go and download the source code themselves and wants to seek a vendor to help them throughout the whole process, you can pick and choose. There's a number, and if you're an enterprise, focus on your core business and have somebody come in and manage, so you focus on your core competency and they can just make sure your environment's up and it's working, and when it needs to be patched and upgraded and tested, they're taking care of that. As I had mentioned, there's like 19,000 community members now, and leveraging the community is a big deal. One of the other knocks on OpenStack is the documentation around it is lax in a lot of cases, but there's a very knowledgeable community of developers and engineers and operators out there that will help you on the journey. And then, as I had mentioned, don't underestimate the time it takes to, 1, turn it up, and then 2, upgrade. There was one of the super users from Intel talked about his war story of upgrading from Grizzly to Havana or Folsom to Grizzly, and it took them what they thought was going to be a couple hours on a Friday, ended up taking them the entire weekend to deploy the new version and get it turned up. The community and the most recent releases have done a lot to fix this, and that was one of the concerns with enterprise adoption, is just the fact that it was a hard process to deploy and upgrade. So a lot of those things have been fixed. The backward compatibility issues are evolving. And then the last one here about consuming OpenStack incrementally. You don't have to swallow a steak. You can bite off a little piece and do Nova and Swift and add the dashboard later, or possibly do Neutron at a later date, or again find a vendor that will do it for you. So as Brett indicated, we spend a lot of time on OpenStack, and we just recently published the OpenStack Pulse. It was one of our more successful long format reports. Gives a general overview of the platform. I highlighted a couple things from the report. It dives into the whole distro wars and the parallels with Linux. Talks about the API debate, how much it should embrace or not embrace AWS, for example. It goes into a lot more detail on community growth and which vendors are involved in helping the community grow. There's a lot more detail on the market sizing stuff that I shared prior, as well as insights from our InfoPro, and then a couple user deployment stories, how some of these vendors enterprises and service providers are embracing OpenStack and how they went about launching it. So the only thing I'll just leave you with is, I'm part of the service provider channel. These are the other folks. A couple of them are actually here. We focus on managed hosting, shared hosting, dedicated hosting, all the providers there, public cloud, content delivery. Again, OpenStack is a focus of ours. And we launched a EMEA channel as well, and Rory Duncan, Penny, who Martin pointed out earlier, are part of that team. So if you get a chance to chat, if you guys are in the service provider community, these are the folks to engage. So I'll just end with that, and thank you for your time.